can go ahead and start to turn to Genesis chapter 22. Sometimes we don't quite understand the opportunities we have sometimes and kind of the ripple effect that can go from them, both good and bad. Shane and I don't remember if it was last week or earlier this week, we talked on the phone for like an hour about a few things, and whatever we got to talking about, it reminded me of how, you don't always realize the weight or importance of, of a moment that doesn't seem important, or an opportunity that you have that seems like it's not a big thing, even when it seems insignificant. When we were talking about this, I remembered kind of the set of circumstances, and I won't go into all of them, that brought about Michael and Brian being ordained as elders. And essentially at the root of that was an aluminum ladder for a boat, which is something you would never think a situation involving a ladder on a boat would then have anything to do with someone being ordained an elder or two people being ordained an elder. So I shared that with Shane earlier this week. And, God can use whatever situation he wants to prove someone. It doesn't have to be, and we'll read here too, it doesn't have to be like what he asked of Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. It doesn't have to be that, although he can. It can be something that seems so insignificant. We'll begin in verse 1 of Genesis chapter 22. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, so that they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this, you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. So, it's almost immeasurable, the impact of Abraham's decision, and not just that one, but all the ones leading up to that, but in that one in particular too. And you can see the foreshadowing that God used through that to show the provision that he would make for all of us. You can go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 13. This is kind of the flip side of there's an opportunity that Saul had that he chose incorrectly, and you can see kind of the repercussions of that. Begin in verse 8. He waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, "Bring the burnt offering here to me, and the peace offerings." And he offered the burnt offering. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him and greet him. Samuel said, "What have you done?" And Saul said, "When I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering." And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever, but now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." And Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal. The rest of the people went up after Saul to meet the army. They went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. And anytime I read this, I always think about how many moving parts there seem to be, how it can seem like Saul, he did have good intentions. He thought he was doing the right thing, but really what it comes down to, and what he should have known, especially being king, is that the root of all this is just obedience. You can think, well, this seems like the right thing to do, but all of these things where God uses these, as tests for people, it all comes down to obedience in one way or another. Saul had the opportunity to obey and just trust the Lord that he would provide, just like Abraham did. But we see kind of the consequences and the ripples that came out from that, because he decided, well, this seems like the right thing to do. I'll do this instead. And basically that kingdom was in that moment, but later in the future, taken from him. You can turn over to Daniel chapter 3. Begin in verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship the image shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments. And they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their house laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." So not only were their lives spared, but it was used as a witness to Nebuchadnezzar, which was the ruler of the world at that time. They were given, position of influence in one of the greatest world-ruling empires that we have ever seen, maybe the greatest that we've ever seen, that these 3 young men were given influence just because they chose to risk death to be obedient, rather than say, like, well, God doesn't want us to die, so we better do this. That they very well could have, and we could be reading a very different story. The opportunities we have every day, maybe much more than meets the eye. Michael and Brian can attest to that firsthand. And I think if we all reflect on the opportunities that we've had and what has come from them, we can kind of see, too, that, like I said earlier, at its root, it just comes down to obedience. And we can see those times when we were obedient, kind of how things never go badly when you're obedient to God, even if it seems like it will make things more difficult. And of course, I think like all of us, I'm preaching to myself more than anyone else when I say these things, because I find that I don't put enough stock in small things sometimes, and you lose those opportunities where you could, opportunities to grow your faith, opportunities to just grow in the Lord, and so, it was kind of more of a reminder to me. But really, let's just try to remember that any given moment can even change someone's eternity if you're being faithful and obedient. Amen.